This video contains discussion of transphobia, both interpersonal and structural, as well as mental illness and suicide. If you're someone who's recently accepted themselves as trans, it might be a bit of a downer. Discretion is advised. A couple weeks ago, I was curled up on my couch enjoying my nightly doom scroll when I happened across this Wikipedia entry titled False Vacuum. It details a few arcane, highly technical ideas from the world of theoretical physics. Not normally my kind of thing as a film school dropout, but it was between reading this and my Twitter feed for the fourth time, so what the hell, I opened it up. Since then, this article has been echoing around in my head nonstop. The ideas it presents are just infectious, and they've been resonating with me for reasons I suspect have nothing to do with theoretical physics and everything to do with trauma. Here's the rundown. It's possible our universe exists in a false vacuum, a resting state of the universe that contains more energy than it needs to. Because of science, the universe will always try to release energy from places with lots of it. So if there's a lot of extra energy in the universe, we find ourselves in a precarious position. Any second, a tiny bubble of lower energy could emerge somewhere in the universe, maybe triggered by a black hole or quantum tunneling. If that were to happen, the bubble of lower energy would expand outward across the universe at the speed of light, releasing all the extra energy with it. The sudden release would be so tremendous, we barely have language for it. It could rip apart not only every last galaxy, but every atom in each one. It could change the laws of physics. It could destroy not only human life, but everything humans have come to understand about the universe. The truest realization of chaos. Now, we don't know if the universe's vacuum is false, so there's no way to know if this is possible. If our universe is in a true vacuum, we're destined for trillions of years of smooth sailing, a slow drift into heat death. But if the vacuum is false, well, the same could happen if we're lucky. It's possible that nothing would ever trigger vacuum decay. But it's also possible a black hole set off this chain reaction yesterday, and a bubble of inconceivable devastation is already barreling towards us at the speed of light, unstoppable. A universe in a false vacuum is described as metastable, where we only call things stable if they're expected to remain that way. Metastability is non-committal. A metastable universe is here for now, but could be wiped out any instant. It's kind of terrifying. The false vacuum comes up pretty often online, and every time it does, you'll see these people going through terrible existential crises in Reddit threads and YouTube comment sections. The idea brings up all kinds of interesting questions. How can you feel safe in this life that can end at any moment for no reason? How do you feel significant in a world that is utterly indifferent to your humanity? For some, forced to ponder these questions for the first time, it's downright harrowing. But for me, reading about the false vacuum felt cathartic. I stared into the screen and I saw myself reflected. This terror that had lived inside me for years finally had a name. The inescapable fear that everything in my life, everything I could even conceive of, could be destroyed any second, and I would be completely helpless to stop it. My whole life feels metastable. A few times now, I've watched helpless as my life has collapsed all around me for reasons outside my control. All the trust I built with others, everything I'd worked for, just gone. And every time I've tried to understand how I could have prevented it. I've adjusted my attitudes and my self-expression to avoid setting about another collapse. But it just keeps happening, not just to me, but to nearly every other trans woman I know. It's almost a given among trans women that you can lose everything at any moment. It's a stress I, and many other trans women, just learned to carry with us. This gendered experience of metastability to me is significant enough that I don't think of trans women as inhabiting the same femaleness as cis women. I mean, we may feel the same as cis women, but gender isn't just a feeling, it's a dialogue with the world around you. You express your gender to the world, and the world answers in turn. The feedback we receive as trans women is different. People expect different behaviors of us, and they punish us more severely for stepping out of line. Today, I want to talk about the ways we're prone to unfairly police trans women, and the material and psychological toll that can take. Trans women and cis women are alike in more ways than we are different. And I'd argue that structural misogyny, or patriarchy, as I've become so embarrassed to say aloud, affects us in broadly the same ways. Women, trans and cis, are expected to display our bodies for men's pleasure, and in the same breath shamed for doing so. We're told to simply accept that others understand our bodies as disgusting. For instance, cis women with periods, trans women with women's bathrooms. And female bodies, cis and trans alike, aren't understood to be our own. They're for men's arousal and comfort. Our appearance is always available for scrutiny. Our bodily autonomy is never a guarantee, always a debate. Cis women struggle to get their tubes tied without their husband's permission, even if they don't have a husband. Trans women for a long time were only allowed to start hormones if they wanted to be regular, feminine, straight women, pursuing only men as romantic partners. But while the undercurrent of misogyny moves us in similar ways, a discrepancy between us is clear. Generally, trans women live shorter, poorer, and unhappier lives. Both are incredibly diverse groups, of course, but the numbers don't lie. A 2014 survey found that 31% of trans people live in poverty, and that 42% are either unemployed or unable to work. Note that these stats are for all trans people, not just trans women. Trans people are incredibly vulnerable to employment discrimination, and many turn to underground industries like sex work, where they face an increased risk of violence. And you've probably heard the statistic that 43% of trans people have attempted suicide at some point in their life. I'll let that one speak for itself. I'm no sociologist, and there's so little academic research that I couldn't back this up if I wanted to, but I have a theory as to how this discrepancy became so severe for trans women in particular. See, our idea of what women should be was built up around cis women. Cis women are expected to be nurturing, fertile, yielding to male authority. Patriarchy has built our entire societies around the subjugation of cis women, the pressure to bear children, provide care, and so on. Feminists have long defined themselves in opposition to these expectations of cis women, and introduced more expansive narratives around what cis women can be. Nowadays, the definition of an acceptable woman varies greatly from one community to another. And I want to be clear, most gender roles for cis women are not liberating. In most cases, they're tools to enforce misogyny. But whether you're a feminist or a hardline conservative, it's a given that cis women have some place in society. This is where we part ways, where even the most incendiary misogynists admit that there is some place for cis women. It seems like the world does not want trans women in any capacity. In most ideologies, no acceptable role exists for trans women at all, not even a repressive one. People don't want us to perform feminized labor like nursing or childcare. They certainly don't want us to be wives or mothers, but they also get up in arms when we work in male-dominated industries or express any sort of kinship with men. We're punished for being too feminine or too masculine, or sometimes both at the same time. You kind of can't win. This reality has revealed itself to me gradually as I've rebuilt myself from the ground up over and over, never quite finding a comfortable life to lead. I transitioned to find my place in the world, but increasingly I worry there isn't one. Since feminism was, understandably, built on combating the pressures we place on cis women, a lot of feminist conceptions of misogyny still center assigned sex, cis female anatomy, and cis female socialization. And of course, those are important to talk about. But it means that even many progressive understandings of misogyny don't map very well onto trans women. They can't convincingly explain why trans women are subject to gendered violence, or why our bodies are often policed in much the same way as cis women's. Our womanhood is understood as incidental, and not worth thinking about too deeply, lest we call into question what it even means to be a woman. This is one manifestation of cis sexism, the idea that cis people's identities and expressions are inherently more normal and natural, and that therefore they should be centered as default. And the progressive crowd might understand that their definitions are imperfect, and that we should treat trans women as women out of basic respect. But a fundamental misunderstanding of us persists, because deep down, trans women just don't make sense to most people. Liberals often parrot the line, "You don't have to understand something to respect it." And that's true. But ideally, people would understand why trans women are women and integrate us into their idea of femaleness as equal players. Right now, I think for most people, accepting trans women is more of a social nicety. Using the right names and pronouns to avoid causing trouble is good, but it's such a weak basis for support. For decades, popular media has poisoned the general public's idea of trans women. We're desperate perverts, insidious infiltrators, hopeless caricatures of real women.
Einhorn is a man! Oh my God!
And that something about trans women makes us uniquely capable of deception and violence.
Say it with me. What you see isn't always true, thank you. Because, baby boy, I've got all the same parts that you do.
Well, the tides have certainly started to turn and representation is improving. I think most people haven't unlearned that idea. Deep down, I think people want to be proven right about us, and they'll take pretty much any evidence that they can get. So our actions are often framed by the expectation of violence. A trans woman rolling her eyes, or swearing a lot, or getting frustrated. Things we wouldn't normally even look for violence in can be framed that way. And God forbid a trans woman acts masculine. Even traditionally masculine behaviors that are common among cis women are touchy for us, like not wearing makeup or being assertive of one's needs. Trans women aren't understood as innately deserving of care and community. Instead, the ability to exist in any given space is a privilege that can easily be taken away. Just about anything can be held up as proof of our true male selves and used to force us out of communities. It feels like communities abandon trans women at the first sign of trouble. Of course, sometimes a trans woman genuinely messes up and causes a lot of harm. But even in those cases, this is no way to deal with it. We're subject to these accountability processes that are less about repairing any harm we've done and more about making us untouchable and isolated. This makes it hard to understand when you've genuinely messed up, since just about any behavior from a trans woman can be construed as harmful. How do you tell the difference between upsetting someone because you hurt them and upsetting someone because you exist? I try my hardest to be a kind person, but God, this makes it difficult. There's no way to navigate the world as a trans woman that won't upset someone. It's tough to find a balance between expressing our internal selves while not angering those who hold power over us. A viewer recently asked why I don't believe assimilation is a viable strategy for the trans community, and this is basically my answer. The gender role trans women occupy is fundamentally different than cis women, and that's outside our control. I've been stealth at my job for nearly 2 years, and I just don't find it fulfilling. In fact, it's pretty alienating. It's not like I'm living out normal womanhood every day. I have to stay constantly vigilant to make sure no one finds out I'm trans, because if they do, I worry they would tear down everything I've worked towards at my job. Of course, for some trans women it is fulfilling to go stealth, if not straight up necessary. I don't have any problem with that. That's really not my business. I just don't think it's where the community should focus our energy. I have a lot more to say on this topic, so I'll elaborate over on my Patreon, where I post an exclusive bonus video to accompany everything that comes out here. You should check it out. It starts at $3 a month and it really helps me out. Anyway, I'll get back to my point. People want us to flatten down our personalities. It's extremely convenient for them. It allows them to think of us as mere caricatures of women instead of three-dimensional beings who are capable of changing. And thanks to this dehumanization, any person in a position of relative power can decide we've overstepped and put us in our place. That is to say, no place at all. We frequently lose friends or jobs or housing over this. This is what I mean when I say life as a trans woman is metastable. It's hard to predict when your life will be ripped out from under you. You never know what small misstep could reveal the false vacuum underlying your life. To be fair, very few people lead lives that are 100% stable. Losing your job or housing is devastating for just about anyone. But the effects can be so much more severe for trans women because society's built-in safety nets largely fail us. Lots of us work in informal underground industries like sex work, or high turnover, supposedly low skill jobs like food service. We're largely insulated from labor law enforcement and treated as disposable within the labor force. If a trans woman gets fired from her job and suspects discrimination might have been at play, there's very little recourse. Most likely the employer will get away with it because proving such a thing in court is both time-consuming and incredibly expensive. And likewise, if a trans woman gets denied an apartment for discriminatory reasons, that's just so incredibly difficult to prove that there's no accountability. So with very few institutional protections, we rely on our social circles instead for security. Those of us lucky enough to have supportive families lean on them heavily. Mutual aid between trans folks is also huge. I've often heard it joked that being trans is just passing the same $20 back and forth forever. There's a culture of lending spare hormone pills when someone runs out, whispering amongst ourselves about which jobs to apply for, which doctors to avoid. For many trans women, support networks are the only path to leading good lives. No one else really looks out for us. In an excellent article for Everyday Feminism, Kai-Cheng Tom cuts to the core of this issue. Trans women literally derive life support from our social networks. We access shelter, care, jobs, even food through word of mouth and communal knowledge. We aren't protected by law or social institutions for the most part. We can't just pick up and start over. For us, social death is real death. It's important to realize that when Tom says real death, she means it literally. Trans people with unsupportive families are up to 3 times more likely to attempt suicide when compared to those whose families support them. Trans suicide stats get thrown at us to argue that being trans is a mental illness, something inherently miserable. But the fact is, if you look at people in supportive environments, the numbers are nowhere near as dire. So much of our well-being rests on other people accepting us. Being a trans woman is putting your lives in the hands of others and just hoping they don't let you down. I think on some level, people know this, and they use it to exert a coercive power over us. I've had bosses mistreat me over and over because they knew I couldn't afford to quit. They knew my odds of finding a better job as a trans woman with no college degree were slim. They've exploited that to steal my wages and misgender me to my face. And I just sat there and took it because I had to pay my rent. It's one of many forces that pushes trans women to stay in bad relationships. A man can abuse his trans girlfriend and know he'll get away with it because if she leaves him, the structure of her life goes up in smoke. Her housing, her reputation, her physical safety could be threatened. Metastability is inescapable for most trans women because we're largely understood as disposable, both in social circles and in the workforce. This problem worsens drastically along other axes of oppression. Many Black trans women rely especially hard on their social circles circles, but they're also subject to way harsher social policing, meaning they stand to lose more when those communities reject them. But this is by no means just a trans woman problem. In fact, it has just as much to do with class. The threat of vacuum decay looms for anyone who slips through the cracks of society. Foster kids, undocumented migrants, ex-convicts. A constant reminder that this world is not built for us, seeping into all of our relationships, encouraging us to self-regulate into submission. Even when this power dynamic isn't being levied on purpose, it's there. I have a healthy relationship with a wonderful partner who'd never dream of using trans misogyny against me, but this dynamic doesn't actually require their participation. It just requires me to know that upsetting them or losing them could uproot my entire life. That's enough to leave me on high alert, always paranoid. And frankly, sometimes this makes me a bad partner. For years, I've been acutely aware of all potential threats, and many times I've thought I was safe and turned out to be wrong. So even now that my situation feels stable, nourishing, and supportive, I can't settle in. I can't trust it. It's tough to shed the coping mechanisms you developed while enduring trauma. I think that makes lots of trans women bad communicators, unfortunately. We can sometimes be unreceptive to important criticism because it's hard to tell apart from trans misogyny. We train ourselves to find the danger in any situation, and sometimes end up lashing out at the smallest perceived slights. I think many trans women have a traumatic relationship to conflict. Here's where mine comes from. When I started transitioning in my first semester of college, I resolved to be a strong woman in the face of danger. That meant standing up for myself whenever possible, correcting every misgendering, calling out every microaggression, the fight response, if you will. I wore short skirts and walked home late at night, bouncing a switchblade in my pocket, just daring the world to try me. But pretty quickly, I learned that the world doesn't like strong women very much, let alone strong trans women with their aggressive, encroaching ways. I found myself so thoroughly punished for fighting back. It felt like my classmates and teachers hated me. I developed this reputation around the school as the difficult one. I lost so many friends that year. I actually had to leave school, and 4 years later, I'm still not ready to go back. So fighting didn't work. It kind of destroyed my sense of self. I tried to rebuild, this time as a carefree party girl, always down for new experiences. Following a brutal come down of I realized this wasn't going to work either. So again, I tried to rebuild. The maternal community figure at the ripe age of 17, here to support anyone through anything. This role wore me bare and left me feeling used. A third time, I wanted to rebuild. But into what? It's not easy being an emotionally healthy trans woman. There's no blueprint. And since it's hard to tell when the next onslaught of trauma could be coming, it's difficult to coax yourself out of the survival headspace. In a better world, all trans women would feel cared for and able to heal. And I believe that world is possible, but considering our current position, which is very far from that, it's no wonder so many of us navigate the world in terms of the classic trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Flight is fairly common. Just up and leave any situation that seems off. Keep moving forward, never settling long enough to trust deeply, giving others a taste of the disposability that so many of us live inside. A lot of trans women spend their lives cooped up in their bedrooms, and frankly, can you blame them? It does keep us away from danger, but also from safe situations we misjudge as dangerous. In doing so, it kind of isolates us from the community that we so badly need. Lots of us freeze, find different ways to not think about the danger. We become passive receivers of our lives, tuning out the violence, but tuning out the rest with it, perpetually stoned or zoned out. And I've certainly dabbled in flight and freezing over the years as I've tried to find my way. Increasingly, though, I've chosen to fawn. I've meticulously crafted my appearance and personality to avoid causing upset. I don't tell my coworkers I'm trans anymore. I wear enough makeup to be acceptably feminine, but not enough to make cis women feel threatened. I'm less outspoken now than I have been in my entire life after rounding off all of my sharp edges in a bid to keep myself safe. This is why I scoff when people congratulate me for living my truth or being my most authentic self. I'm doing neither of those things. I don't even know what my most authentic self would look like. The world kind of stomped on her right out the gate. I'm living as a sanitized approximation of myself, mostly to avoid becoming a target. But fawning unquestionably has made me safer. I have a decent job now. I don't really get into trouble. I'm the poster child for socially acceptable trans women. But every now and then, I'm reminded that in doing all this, I'm not reasoning with some rational ideology that'll relent if I act right. I'm reasoning with transmisogyny, a system that does not care even a little bit about my puny little life. It's like bargaining with the vacuum of space, begging it not to rip me apart as it so easily could. So long as I'm still here, there's something left to destroy. No concessions I make will ever be enough. Last time I was reminded of this was about 2 years ago. I was at a table read with some friends, eating pizza, going over a few scripts, when suddenly my phone started blowing up. Someone had created a fake Facebook profile that looked exactly like mine and had started messaging some cis women I know. The messages were extremely explicit. They detailed vivid and entirely fabricated anecdotes about my sex life, clearly dreamt up by someone who thinks of trans women as perverted fetishists. The recipients ranged from former high school classmates to my friends' ex-girlfriends. Definitely not the kind of people it'd be cool to start these conversations with. I had done nothing to provoke this. The person who set up this profile and sent out these messages was a complete stranger, zero mutual friends, I'd never heard of them in my life kind of thing. This kind of random attack breaks our ability to build meaning out of tragedy, leaving us in this paranoid limbo. I mean, if I didn't do anything to trigger this, what's to keep it from happening again? But that day, at the table read, nothing collapsed. My life's vacuum proved true. I texted all the women affected and apologized profusely. I explained that this was a random incident that I had no hand in and that I would never say anything like that. They were mostly acquaintances who easily could have dismissed my apology, but they believed me. My friends at the table read were empathetic and had my back. They didn't mind when I gathered my things and left in a panic. From there, I took a cab downtown to meet my partner and their family. I got wine drunk and ranted extensively about this motherfucker trying to ruin my reputation, and my reputation is everything, and how if people believe this, I'm screwed. I was messy and inarticulate and acting kind of embarrassing, but they sat and listened. They didn't use my anger to confirm stereotypes they'd been taught about trans women. They consoled me. All this time, I'd been sure that thanks to trans misogyny, there was no place in this world for me, that I could never settle anywhere because the danger would always be lurking. But I had found my place. I'd just been too scared to see it sooner. So this time, I think my vacuum is true. Not metastable, just stable. I'm making enough money to live, and I'm surrounded by people who love me. I have a nice little apartment with 2 cats and lots of art on the walls. I have a partner who cooks me breakfast in the morning and sleeps on my chest at night. My life feels safe right now, and I think it'll hold. I really hope it'll hold. I think the best way to help trans women lead more stable lives is honestly just help us pay our rent, pay for our medications, anything like that. I've linked to several GoFundMes in the description. I highly recommend you donate to them. Thank you all so much for watching. The outpouring of support I've gotten since the Mogai video has just been totally overwhelming and beyond my wildest expectations. I especially want to thank my supporters on Patreon, including Smaz V, Ruby Landau Pickus, Rebecca Gale, Joe Azar, Jen Pseudonym, Tracy Sim, Darla Butler, Basil Bennett Levy, Maddie Mahmood, UHHH, NNN, DHD, JS, and Cherie Monjovi. Thank you all sincerely. I am 1 month into my YouTube comeback, and it has already been a totally wild ride, and it has been a pleasure, so I hope to see you next time.